Even before coronavirus hit the US, the increasingly rapid evolution of the media landscape forced executives in that space to face a simple truth: adapt or cease to exist. And the COVID-19 pandemic has seemingly accelerated the need to address that line of thought. Here now to discuss this and more is John Harrison. He is EY's global media and entertainment leader. Thanks so much for joining me today, John.
Thanks so much for having me. It's good to see you.
Yes. So with the coronavirus pandemic, how has the focus shifted for media companies from before the pandemic to now? Because it seems like in all sorts of industries, there's been a little bit of scrambling to deal with how to cope with this.
Yeah, without a doubt. It's certainly an unprecedented time. And I'd say for the media and entertainment industry, executives are looking at it almost in a two-pronged approach. The first is obviously dealing with the immediacy of the crisis and working around their workforce, their people strategy, and also dealing with maintaining cash flow and liquidity and frankly, keeping the lights on during this first initial phase when we're all sheltering at home. The other thing that executives are focused on, though, is really trying to understand, based on some early signals, whether this COVID-19 environment is going to permanently change how all of us as consumers interact with and purchase and subscribe to media. And we've got some research that is just coming out right now. We surveyed 3,500 US households over the last several weeks, really trying to understand the changes that consumers are making as they relate to media or communications. And some of the early findings are interesting. 27% of all respondents and 43% of those aged 18 to 34, so somewhat of the younger millennial demographic, do in fact say that at least right now, they believe the impact of the coronavirus and the shelter at home and all the changes we're feeling will permanently change how they consume content and media more broadly. So some pretty big percentages, at least early on.
Yeah, that seems like a pretty big thing to need to unlock there for these media companies, because with the different consumption habits, that is sure to impact the financial picture. So how are companies grappling with that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Companies are focused on trying to understand, will consumers be more inclined to cut the cord and move to an all streaming video relationship? Will consumers ever feel comfortable going back to venues where they aggregated with large groups? So concert halls, sporting events, business to business conventions. And then ultimately in this environment where people are feeling stretched financially and really looking at every nickel and dime that we all spend, is that resetting our budgetary expectations for media? And that could be resetting them up or down. And I think companies right now are really trying to understand, at least based on these early signals, whether bigger changes are coming down the road more quickly than were previously happening.
Right. And it's hard to plan for, 3 or 6 months down the road. But when it comes to that, mid to longer term strategic thinking, getting through to the other side of this, how is that impacting plans now to make sure companies that are set up for the long term and the other side of this?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so we at EY think about it in three different phases that somewhat overlap. So there's dealing with what's urgent right now. And again, it's the workforce, it's cash flow, it's liquidity, it's making sure you're serving your clients or customers as they need to be served right now. Moving into the next phase is really understanding, how do we create a more resilient enterprise? What sort of changes do we need to make in how we conduct our business, how we run our operations, that will allow us to respond to what could be a choppy and uneven recovery with openings and closings and the like, and really fortifying our operations for any different scenario. And there's a lot of scenario planning and forecasting that's being done. And then for our most well-capitalized clients, the ones who are in a position to really think strategically for the longer term, there are teams standing up at companies right now saying, how do we strategically position our business in terms of our growth agenda? Do we need to accelerate projects, organic projects that we've been developing internally? Do we need to look more aggressively at a strategic agenda that includes some M&A and maybe even being opportunistic with some targets that were on the radar screen previously that now might be much more attractively priced? So we think there's an overlapping set of agendas at play right now with different time horizons attached to them.
Yeah, that makes sense. And for those companies that were really facing, I guess you could say, what is the harsh reality of the need to really reinvent themselves before this whole thing, realistically, how long do you think that they can hold on without long lasting permanent damage to their businesses?
Yeah, I think it's almost, you have to look at it almost on a case by case basis. And some companies, particularly companies that have a revenue model that's completely tied to the aggregation of physical audiences and admissions and ticket sales and the like, those companies are in a rescue mode and really trying to just make it through to August, September, October, whenever we're all hopefully back, or at least allowed back into the world in a way that we used to be. I think companies that are maybe not faced with that immediate urgencies are taking a much more balanced look at what they can change operationally to create the most amount of flexibility to then go pursue growth with however the new normal shakes out.
Yeah, well, it's definitely going to take a lot of creativity and planning, and it's an interesting story to track. So we'll stay on it. And thank you so much for your insights today.